So you have been provided with two tables. One is conversation messages, then the other one is interviews. You need to write a query to compute the average time it takes for each user to respond to a system message. It's in the field called message type, and then where it could be either a user or system. System indicates that the system has been texting you, and then user indicates that you have been replying to the system's message. You need to calculate the average time that it takes for each user to respond. So hi everyone, I'll introduce myself. I'm Sai Kumar, and then I did my master's in data science at UConn. And then right after my master's, I started working as a lead data analyst at Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. And then, yeah, Will, I would like to know about yourself and then how has been your journey.
Yeah, so I just graduated from University of Syracuse with my master's in data science. I actually just finished 2 days ago, so let's go. And yeah, I currently am a talent agent for a bunch of esports gamers and Twitch streamers. However, I've been looking to, apply my knowledge of data science and everything I've learned into this field. And so, I'm here looking to, better perfect that, get better at my SQL knowledge and things like that.
Congrats on your graduation.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll get started with the mock interview.
Yeah, so first off, just looking at this, write a query to compute the average time it takes for each user to respond to the previous system message. So I'm going to assume that, the ID is the ID for the conversation messages in this table. Created at is the timestamp where it was created. Updated at, I'm not so sure exactly what that would be. Maybe when the table is updated, when there's a response. Text, I'm assuming is the message type. And then the interview ID. So who responded to the message. And the message type is that system or user. And then the other table we have is the interviews table where, you have the ID of the interviewee or interview, the time it's created at, updated at, and then the user ID. Okay, so then what we kind of need is am I allowed to look at the table?
Yeah, sure.
There we go. Okay, so updated as null, text is null, the message type is system and user, and then we have the interview ID. Okay, so it looks like the table here has the response, when it says user, it's responding to this system message, I'm assuming. Can I assume that?
Yeah.
And then so on and so forth. So what we kind of need, I think we need to join these two tables together just so we can group by the user ID and the interview ID. And then from there, we can do an average lead, so we can get the next response to the system, and we can partition by the interview ID in the order by the user ID.
We can start querying. Yeah.
Let's start with the CTE.
Okay.
Actually, first, I am going to just do a select statement so we can see the CTE and what it looks like. But select from user ID. Yeah, and we also need the created at date. And then if I do a lead function over the created date to get the next one, to get the next iteration of the timestamp. So to see when the user responded. Because if I'm looking at the table, it looks as if I can't see it now, but here it is. It goes system user. And these are ordered by, the times that they responded in. Over partition, it would be partition by the user ID, order by, I don't know why it didn't work. Created at, why is this? Oh, spelled that wrong. And then we're actually from conversation, yes. Join the interviews column. User ID is equal to the interview ID. And then I'll do this. I'll call this C. Sorry. This is the wrong name. So here's my CTE that I'm hoping works, but I'm taking the interview ID, the created at, and then taking the lead of created at partition over this user ID so I can get the response ordered by the date it was created at. Now, if I run that, let's see. I made a mistake here. First off, too many of these. Let's label this as when the user responded.
Okay, let me help you here. You can use partition by. It's not just partition, but then partition
by. Sorry. Oop. Okay, so I'm assuming here I connected on interview ID and ID. If I did the inner join, it might have gotten, let's see here. I think maybe if I switch where I'm pulling, no. Actually, I also need the message type, don't I? Because if I want to use that later in my CTE, I'm going to need that. Where did I mess up here? This is an inner join. Interviews on user ID and interview ID. I don't know if you can help me out a little bit here.
Yeah, like just make sure that you're using the right columns to join, and then like check the input. I could tell you that much. Try to use the correct columns to join.
So maybe if I do this interview ID on the ID of the interviews. So okay, awesome. That's actually exactly. I think yeah, this is exactly what I wanted. Yeah. So in the CTE that I'm about to use, you can see that it has the system message type, then the user, system user, system user. It has it created and the response. So now all I need to do is take the average of the user response and not the system. So let's just create the CTE with select from CTE. I know first I need to get the user ID. I believe the example output is user ID. So it needs to be interview ID as user ID. And then I need the average of the response times for the user. So for that, I need to take a time difference. One, I like to use a timestamp diff. What the average does it need? It needs to be in seconds, I'm assuming? Or do you want to make it something
You can use
different?
seconds.
Okay, so I'll do second for seconds. And then the first one would be created at. No, it would be the response created at. And then the response, and I'll take this as response times from CTE, where message type equals it is created average since user responded to previous system message. So this is the responding to system, so I need to do system. Yeah, there we go. And then I need to group by the interview ID. I believe that's right, unless there's some small mistakes I made in my syntax. Okay, the expected output is user ID 1 and 2 response time. Okay, so I got the response times right. I got the user ID right. However, it needs to be 1 and 2. I think I can just do the user ID because they had that for my CTE. Nope. Okay. Ew. This is a small thing that I don't necessarily know how to change the name. I mean, should I rank it? I can rank it to make it 1 and 2.
I can give you another tip. There's a column called user ID in the interviews table.
So I should pull it from select this user ID, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So should join this? I can no. If I change, okay. I think I'm overthinking this. How about I just pull user ID right here? Yep, from interviews. There we go.
Yeah,
Took me
I
a
was
second
waiting
there,
for
but
that. Okay, that's nice. Okay, let's get into some questions. Could you explain me the output first before we move on? And then explain
yeah.
me your approach from the start, like what was your thought process, and then how did you start, and how can you understand the output?
So the way I started in my head was after reading this was I did learn I knew immediately that I would be using, some sort of lead or lag, and that's because we're looking for, the response, the next iteration in the table. And so I knew from then I was probably going to need a seed because I was going to need to call that lead and that column in my next select statement. So that's why I went ahead and did that. I knew the response times was, you told me it was going to be seconds. I knew I was be taking the average, like I said in the question. One thing that did trip me up was, this updated at column, which was, null at the time. And if I didn't really look at the data or understand that, that could have been, it could have been interpreted in many different ways. So that was kind of my approach. Again, I knew I'd be taking, the time diff here down below. I knew the two things I needed was lead and the time diff. And I just wanted to figure out a way to make that happen. And so that was kind of my process.
And then, like, can you explain me the output?
Yeah, so the output here is one of the users who I'm assuming is an interviewee. User one, it took 75 seconds to respond. User two here takes on average 120 seconds to respond. So I'm imagining this like, if you're asking a question to a system, or if a system sends someone an email, how long does it take for that person to come back? And which would be a good reason why we would want this in the workplace. Is it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever used Fiverr, but they have a system where you can look at people who use Fiverr and they say the average time it takes them to respond to a message is this amount of time. And so if you're in a rush, some people actually really like that when they can read, oh, he responds in less than an hour. Like I'm gonna use this guy. So it's actually a really cool feature that you could add to several different facets of your business.
Okay, that's good. So I do have few follow-up questions on what you have written. So like the first question I do have is how would you modify this query to handle cases where there might be multiple user messages without the system intervention?
So if you're saying if a user responds multiple times to the system,
Yeah, let's say the system says, "Hi, how are you?" And then you say, "I'm fine" in one message, and then "I'm good" in another message. And then you're sending out two messages instead one.
if I were to edit this, so I'd probably take any message before the user or before the system message responds. I would take still the first one, because what we're kind of looking for is how long does it take for the user to respond, not necessarily the system, which, the system responding is definitely, it's a bigger issue on its own. But again, I think I would keep this roughly the same, except for the way I'm partitioning here, because right here I didn't partition by system and user, which is something I would need to do.
So I would like to know your approach. Like you
Yeah.
don't have to query it now, but then like how would you proceed if you were to?
I would only look at the user responses, and then I would take the first one to respond. I wouldn't change it that much unless I'm trying to get the most recent response. Then I would take it, and see which time is, if I ranked all of them and to see the time window. If we're dealing, with multiple users, I would classify it by users and then rank it by time. And then wherever it said the most recent, user response, that's the one I would take.
Okay, yeah, that's a possibility. That's a way to do it. Yeah, and okay. And then like if you were dealing with a large data set, like how would you optimize this query?
I think I would optimize it I've never dealt with that before. So with, optimizing to a bigger set. But if I had to, I think I would keep it relatively similar. However, again, I would add that feature I just talked about, because we don't know necessarily when those mistakes would happen. Because right now it's only iterating one by one, when it really needs to be, partitioning by the interview ID, then by the date and the user system response all at once.
Got it. Okay. Okay. So and then how can you use this output to improve the user experience?
So again, like the thing I mentioned, like with the fiber, something like that could be great to increase, user experience. Them at the moment, we're seeing how fast a user responds to a system. So again, you can also see like, when was the system message sent, what time of day, and so you can see by the averages and like by what time the system message was sent, and why they're taking so long to respond. We could probably optimize when those system messages are sent so they can see them quicker. We can get responses quicker, and we can help them, just make decisions faster.
Got it. Okay. And then like what other metrics can you track with the user system interaction method? Like say now you're tracking a response time. So what are the other metrics that you can track to help the business grow?
Response times in here, we also do have text. So seeing, I know they were null when we looked at them, but I think that's just for the purpose of this question. Having the text, the actual message, tracking the time of day, those possibilities make it so that, again, we can optimize our system for better responses and at better times. And if people aren't responding to certain things, and if we can also, get the sentiment of how they're responding to certain messages, when our users are online and what kind of messages they're responding to.
Yeah, got it. Like in terms of metrics, what can those be? Like you can use this response time for some reasons. I would like to know what are those, and then what are other specific KPIs that you would track to help the business grow in particular.
Other metrics, wow. Are those not necessarily metrics, time of day, place? I mean, it would be nice to have where they're sending the message from, tracking location.
Yeah, how would you use those to help the business grow?
I think I would use it to help, especially where, there are areas to help again with, I feel like I've like kind of answered. Maybe you can help me exactly like some examples of some KPIs that you would think?
Yeah, like one of the metrics that you have calculated is response time. And then the something else can be like a customer satisfaction rate. If you had a rating of satisfaction rating, you could use that to make some decisions. Like if you had the text, like you mentioned, you can do sentiment analysis to understand the sentiment. Or if you have something like efficiency or something, and then these are the kind of metrics that you can track when you're analyzing the user system interaction charts,
Yeah,
something
I
like
know
that.
that makes sense.
Okay. So like if you see that, like if you see this output, a user, one user takes around 75 seconds on an average to reply, and then another user takes around 120 seconds. So there might be a user who might take more than this, and then there might be a user who might take less than the 75. So what are the measures that you would take if a user is taking a longer time to respond?
If a user is taking longer time, I would first check to see if we've sent them more than one message, because messages can be missed. I wouldn't want to send more than necessarily. Let's say three, because then maybe they're just not responding. If we can see, if they're actually on the window or track their session time on the website, or can I assume where this is a website, or I don't think.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you were taking average. Even if they were
Yeah.
sending multiple messages, you were taking average. So that shouldn't affect the number.
I would say again, I would rethink if they're taking a lot longer to respond. Again, I would rethink the time of day to look at that. I think that's a really big reason for why people take a long time. Other users, people who are taking longer, again, I don't think necessarily 75 seconds versus 120 seconds is that long of a difference. Except, if on average it is that long, I'd like to know, necessarily where they're located. That could be another reason for how long they're taking to respond. I do think people get distracted from pings. So I would have to go back to that session window. How long are they on the website? Like, what are they there for? Is their response they're needed? Do we want it to be immediate, or is it something they need to think about? And so knowing what is being sent is a big reason.
Got it. And how do you think that the time of the day or location would affect the response time?
Some people open things and go to work. Some people open things and go to bed, and so the response times can vary, especially at the time of day. I think looking at the average time someone takes to respond at 8 a.m. in some locations, in a specific location, or 9 p.m. Those averages are different, and you can't look at all the averages at the same time. You're like, why is this guy taking so long? It's like, well, he only logs on at 9 p.m. at night. And so I do think those are the reasons why they're very important.
What about the location?
Location, again, for time of day, some people are 3 hours ahead. So if you send out a blast message, they could take a while to respond. Location can also depend on other factors of what exactly are we sending this system message? Like, who is our user on the other end? And I would need to know more about what type of conversation that they're having, why they're having this conversation.
You can assume a customer support.
Okay.
The user is having some issue with the website, and then so he wanted to use some customer support.
Yeah. So for, again, location, again, time, and then other reasons why location could be an issue is because, are there other customers around the area? Is this an area that we're prominent in? Or do we have a lot of customers there already? Do a lot of people use this in our area? I can give an example. I know I live out in California, and we use Spectrum and for our Wi-Fi, and we have to use Spectrum. And there are other people in certain parts of California that don't necessarily need to use it. And I talk to people a lot when I have a customer issue. The only reason I've sticked with it for so long is because I have to use it in the building I'm in. But if you don't have to use something, if you're in a spot where there are other possible opportunities, they could be around. They could be looking at different competition and suppliers.
Got it. So like you were mentioning that like it's the internet issue that might cause the delay more than the user.
Yes,
so could you tell me like what if the internet was seamless? What were the things that you would see or monitor for the users who took longer time? Assuming the internet is seamless.
That's a great question. What are some things that you would suggest, around this particular topic?
Maybe you can check for complexity of the user requirement. That's why the system might take longer to respond, or like when system is responding, it might have given a complex response. That's why the user might have taken longer time to grasp it and then take time. So what you could do is analyze that particular text which took longer, and then see the complexity of that text, and then complexity of the requirement, something like that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, that's the sentiment of the text that I talked about earlier. I think it could be a very big issue, especially, again, like what you said, what they talked about, who they're talking to, what their issue is. Yeah.
So, yeah, those were my questions. So, I'll get into feedback. So, before I go into my feedback, how do you think you did? And then what do you think that you could have done better?
So this is my first SQL interview I've ever done, and I know SQL, I know how to write it. I didn't think about the deeper questions that you asked. So I'm actually really happy we did this because, thinking why it's applicable, where else could we use it in the field. I felt like I had a few okay responses, a few other things I just really just didn't know. I tried to riff. I appreciate you going, drilling in. And so, yeah, those are just things I hadn't really thought off the top of my head because, again, I don't really use SQL in my day to day, but, I love doing SQL problems because they're fun brain teasers. But, the next step.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah, I'll get into my feedback. So, yeah, that's a great point that you mentioned. Like, for the audience that who's watching too, when you are getting a SQL question to solve it, it doesn't end when you get a correct solution. That's when it starts because in the industry, it's not about getting the correct output, but it's about using the correct output to make business decisions or help the business grow and make money. So it doesn't end there. So try to be prepared for business questions also, not just your technical questions. So because that's where it starts. So I'll get
Yeah,
into
that
the
makes sense.
feedback first. So first I'll get to the querying part first. One thing I noticed is that you started querying without understanding the difference between different IDs. There are like few IDs available in two columns. There's ID, interview ID in one first table, and then ID and user ID in second table. You did face some difficulty and then confusion in choosing the different IDs, and that was for the first part. And then small syntax errors like partition and other things. And then yeah, those were the things I noticed in the query. And then you did take a few time. You did get to the output at the end where you were able to get there in a few clicks, and that was good. And then your thought process, it's also good, like you knew what you wanted to do, and then you knew that you wanted to use CTE, and then you wanted to join two tables to get the user ID. But it's just that try to ask more questions. So what I would recommend is, before you start typing the query, go see the input, see what are all the columns available, and then get clarity on different IDs, different primary keys, and then different foreign keys available in other tables. You can always ask the interviewer. So I'm guessing, or I'm assuming, that this is the primary key for this table and this is the foreign, and then this is how I would join. Is this correct? Like you can ask the interviewer, and then he or she will be more than happy to correct you or guide you in the right path. Those were the things that I observed in the querying part. And the next part is, the query is correct for this test case, but whereas as I mentioned, if they were continuous, if the user was texting more than one message at a time without the system response, the query will not work. So what you could do is maybe add another read column to check if that user, if it's the user or system sending the message, and then filter out to just user messages and then take the average. That's one thing that you can do. And coming to the next question was, yeah, optimizing the query. So you can use indexes to optimize the query, and then you can run it faster. So here you are using interview ID created at and then message type. These are the things that you are using. So if you could index, if you are using indexing, so that's when you can optimize your query. So you can also learn these techniques because your interview doesn't end at getting the correct output, because as I mentioned, that's where it starts. That's when you get a lot of follow-up questions like why you did this, why you did that, why didn't you do this, why did you do that. So understand different optimization techniques, different ways to solve. Like right now you were able to solve using this method, but if I gave you another time, would you be able to solve in another way? So try to think of different ways that you can solve. And then optimization is very important, and normalization, all these things that you can learn, that sets you apart from the competition.
That's great feedback. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
No problem, no problem. So the next one was, how do we improve the user experience? So you can see, you can check where the users are struggling. The first point is the system sent a complex response. Maybe that's why user was struggling to reply back. Maybe he was taking time to understand system response, or maybe system sent a wrong response. So maybe the user might have been confused. So that's one thing that you can check to improve the overall experience. And then maybe you can also improve the experience. You can send later on time, once you analyze with the huge data, you can automate the responses for simple queries. So you're there, so that AI can handle. So that when it's a small query, and then where you can find the help on website, a human intervention is not required. An automated response is sufficient. So for the other metrics question, yeah, like as I mentioned, it's the satisfaction scores or like first response time or like sentiment analysis that can be done to better understand the system responses and then user responses, which could help the business grow or save time, which ultimately is saving money. And then the next part was, so for the longer response time, as you mentioned, you can analyze the location and then the segments, as you mentioned, and also the complexity again. Like, is the system sending the complex messages or is the user sending complex messages? That's why it took longer time for user to respond, or like sometimes the system might take longer time to respond. You can also analyze, instead analyzing average user response rate, you can also analyze maybe average system response rate. You can find few insights there. That's one thing. And maybe you can, once that conversation has been ended, you can always take feedback from the user and then analyze those, like user surveys or like small feedback session or something, a rating session, or like we get that all the time on Amazon or like Walmart or anything that when we order. So as simple as that. Yeah, that was my feedback. Like pretty good, just that like try to get the questions clarified about the tables and the data, mention those in assumptions to the interviewer, and then get certified that okay, this is what it is, and then you can proceed. And then always make sure to check the input data before you start typing. See the data first, see if there are any null values like edge cases, maybe error handling, something like that. So if there's null value, how would you handle it? So you might have to put a filter to filter them out, or like you might have to handle them in a different way using case when statement. So those are the few things that you can do, and then maybe that's how you can stand out from the crowd. Once you're done with your querying, you can always say that when I was querying, I found that there might be a null value. So this is how I would handle in real time by using this approach. And then obviously the business part. So it doesn't end at getting the correct output, but we also need to answer on business questions because that's how business make money. We write queries and then we use that output to see the pain points and then drill as much as you can, like the deeper analysis that you were mentioning. So we do that and then see what exactly is going correct and what's going wrong, and then try to make the improvements, and then at the end we make money. Yes.
We like money.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great feedback. So clarifying the questions, check the input data, showcase different ways of doing the SQL. And then I can talk about afterwards, go into the business questions, find out why this is applicable, how can we make it better, and see, how this applies to the company as a whole and how we can,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
At the work, you might have to extend it. Like maybe you can get data from different other tables, like location tables that you are mentioning. So the location might be stored in another table. So get that data and then increase the complexity of the query to do deeper analysis. So it's all about your problem solving skills and critical thinking.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, those are all the questions I had. I appreciate this a lot. I feel like I learned a lot. But again, this is my first SQL interview question I've ever done. So, and I've been practicing my SQL a lot. So I appreciate, the clarifying questions and the business and knowing more after the question is done. So
yeah, exactly. For your first interview, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, you did pretty good.
I've been studying a lot.